All right, so we have another Go Format Commander tournament that's coming up now, and what I'm going to be doing is just going over what Go Format Commander is for people that may not know, being new to or didn't take part in last tournament that was held. Just kind of go over some of the basics with it, and then give some advice on card choices and deck building strategies just off of information that I learned from winning the last tournament. So what Go Format Commander is a Highlander format, which means that every card's going to be limited to one ofs. And then what you've also got is that you choose Go Format Commander, a commander for your deck, or basically like a deck master, kind of similar to the anime where they main characters went to the cyberverse or whatever, and they had to choose deck masters for their decks every time they dueled. So it's gonna be similar to that, really. What it is that you choose a monster card, and then based off the type and attribute of that monster, the rest of those monsters in your deck have to match that type and attribute. There are some special exceptions. So there's some cards that you can make. Yeah, there's some cards that you can pick as commander that aren't monsters, like Scapegoat, Stray Lambs, Embodiment of Apophis, things like that. And then there's also some exceptions of, like, say, Manticore of Darkness, where if you choose Manticore of Darkness, you can also pick Beast and Wing Beast along with Beast Warriors, which is what Manticore of Darkness is. So there's some special instructions or special exceptions listed down below. I'm not going to go over everything, but I will say that there are some bans as well. So darks and lights are banned for being deck commanders. So you can't pick something that's stupidly busted like BLS or Genzo as your deck commander. Spellcaster and warrior type monsters are also banned. So something like Injection Fairy Lily or Magician of Faith. And then fusion monsters and then Morphing Jar specifically, just because its effect is kind of busted for what this format is. And you kind of went basing your deck around what your deck commander is. The best deck commanders are typically the ones that have good typing and attributes, but are also just good monsters or good cards on their own. So something like Scapegoat, for example, is just a really good deck commander to have. The typing is really good. Earth attribute is probably the best attribute for this format. Beast typing is pretty good. It's you don't really need like to worry about the typing when you have Earth attribute, because Earth attribute alone is pretty much enough to make a good deck out of. And then Scapegoat itself is just a really good card that you can use with being able to have, 4 tokens. So one of the decks that got or the deck that got second place last tournament used Scapegoat as its deck commander, and it combined it with United We Stand. So anytime you drew United We Stand, you can combine it with Scapegoat and just get a really beefed up token that you put a United We Stand equip card on. So things, strategies like that. Another rule that I will mention is that the person going first, the turn one or player one turn one, can't use their commander that first turn. So if I go turn one and I draw and it's my first turn, I can't activate Scapegoat or summon out my deck commander at all. I can't touch it. But if you go second and it's your turn one, then you can use your commander. That's just kind of to even out. So that's kind of part of the reason why stuff like Morphing Jar is banned, is so that you can't just play your entire hand and then set Morphing Jar and then get a whole new hand. And then you can't just use Scapegoat turn one and be like, okay, I'm protected from everything. And then we'll go over here where we can see the top 4 decks from last tournament for the first tournament that was played. You can look at these and get some ideas of how people were building their decks and deck building strategies and what worked and what didn't work. Out of the top four place decks, 3 of them did have Earth attributes. Like I said, it's pretty much universally accepted that Earth attribute is pretty much the best attribute for this format. I don't think some people have been saying that it's basically like unplayable to play anything other than Earth attribute. I don't agree with that at all. I do think you have to get a lot more creative if you're going to pick something that's not Earth attribute, just because Earth attribute offers so many more card choices than the other attributes. But I don't think it's just tier zero. If you're not playing Earth, you might as well just not be playing at all. You're not going to be competitive. I don't think that's the case at all. But this one was my deck with the Mega Rock Dragon as the commander. This was JJ's deck, the second place deck with Scapegoats as the commander. And then TK's deck, he had Decayed Commander, which is a kind of unique card. I'll let you go look that up, what that does. But it was kind of like a similar kind of like Pyramid Turtle Commander. Some people or two other decks played Pyramid Turtle, but he decided to go with the Decayed Commander as a better kind of monster. And then fourth place deck was the Manticore Darkness, the only one that wasn't Earth attribute, and that was the Fire attribute. But like I said, Manticore is kind of special because it gives you other typings. So Manticore itself is just a Beast Warrior, but because of its effect, it's also you're also allowed to use beasts and wing-based monsters in your deck as well. So those extra typings kind of make up for the fact that it's a Fire attribute, which Fire attribute is probably the worst out of all the attributes to select from, just because you have the least amount of selection. So those are the copying decks, and then this was the fifth deck right here. This is the award winner for like most creative, or the one that Necromancy liked the most. But you can go through and look at these decks and see what cards are being continually chosen by people for main decking and what cards are being chosen for side decking. Most of your pretty meta relevant cards are obviously going to be here. So Trinity, Mirror Force, Ring of Destruction, all those cards are pretty much in here. And then when you're talking about Earth attribute, like Goblin Attack Force was almost in every deck. Exiled Force was almost in every deck. DD Assailant, Berserk Gorilla, Giant Rat, Gigantes, those type of cards were almost in every deck that were Earth attribute just because of how strong they are. And then what we'll go over to is just kind of some deck or card tip advice, just kind of based off of what I learned from playing the last tournament. One of the big things, I'll go over like some of the bad cards to begin with, but one of the big things I saw was people playing Upstart Goblin a lot. I think this card is just terrible for the GOAT format commander format. When you're thinking about Upstart Goblin, you obviously think about Chaos Turbo because they basically run two Upstart Goblin standard every deck. It's pretty well standard at this point. There's some other decks that will run Upstart Goblin sometimes, like Goat Control maybe, or Chaos Control, things like that might sometimes run Upstart Goblin, but mostly you're thinking of Chaos Turbo that runs it, maybe like a Chaos Recruiter. But what this card does, it's just giving really your opponent just 1,000 life points for free. Most people, I think, when they saw this card, they're just thinking, well, if I'm running a 40 card deck, all of one ofs, then I'm going to have some cards that are just kind of subpar and that I don't want. And then if I have this Upstart Goblin, it's just a free card, and then giving my opponent 1,000 life points isn't a big deal. In reality, it is actually a huge deal. What this format is, it's very grindy and very much a one for one kind of trading was what the first tournament was. A lot of it was just kind of using your beaters, using your trap cards, your Sakus, and your widespread ruins, your Fishers, your smashing grounds, things like that. Just a one for one trade and kind of being this really grindy game and using your beater monsters to beat over other monsters. So if you're giving your opponent 1,000 life points for no reason, it's going to help them. It gives them 1,000 life points to use for something like Injection Fairy Lily, or for me it was like Dimension Fusion or Return from the Different Dimension, or it recovers some of their life points after they've used a card like Solemn Judgment. And this doesn't do anything for you. When you're thinking about a 40 style one of card deck, instead of thinking of this as, oh, it's a free card, just think of this as being like a useless card that gives your opponent 1,000 life points. Where what you want to have is 40 meaningful cards. Like every card in your deck, you want to have as meaningful of an impact on the duel as possible. Whereas Upstart Goblin just has a negative impact because you're not going to be playing a Chaos Turbo style deck where Chaos Turbo, they don't care about giving their opponent 1,000 life points. They don't care that, you know, about that. They care about getting their as many cards as possible for them because they want to set up their combos. They want to set up discarding Night Assailant for Raigeki Break and getting a plus off of that. They want to set up, getting their Thunder Dragon and discarding that and getting two more, and then setting up their Chaos plays, their Chaos summons, and getting out their stronger monsters that are stronger than basically any other monster in the format, and just beating their opponent that way, and basically out card advantaging and out resourcing their opponent. So giving away 1,000 life points isn't a big deal to them, but that's not how these games in this format are going to play. You're not going to just out card advantage your opponent that easily with something like Upstart Goblin. So that was one of the big things, is that like most people seem to still kind of think of the Goat Commander format as being similar to just regular style Goat cards, and a lot of the card choices that they made were things that are just good in goat regular goat format, but just aren't as good in this format. So if you wanted like a free card jar, Greed would be a lot better because it could potentially sucker in a back row card, a back row destruction card. Back row removal is pretty limited in this format. You get one heavy storm, one MST, and one dust tornado. And then after that, you got to get a bit more creative with your back row removal, or it's just going to be more cost heavy, like something like Raigeki Break or Magic Jammer, I guess. Things that are going to cause you to have a cost of a discard or whatnot. Solemn Judgment is also one that I'm kind of iffy on. It's obviously a good card. Don't get me wrong; it does a lot and has a lot of versatility. But that 4,000 life point cost is pretty steep, and you can't have multiple of these. Solemn Judgment is typically a card that does better in at least multiples of like two. If you're gonna pay 4,000 life points to negate something, then you're probably gonna pay another 2,000 life points to maintain your board advantage. But with just one of it, you pay your 4,000, and then if your opponent still has an answer that they can use, then you just lost that 4,000 life points and lost board advantage as well if they, play another card that does what they need. So it's not a bad card by any means, but it's very steep cost and something that should be thought about. You have to think too that the second place deck here was a beat down burn style deck. So they had a lot of beater monsters with like the Goblin Attack Force and the Ejection Fairy Lily, the Berserk Gorilla, but then they also had burn cards like Death Koala, Chain Energy. What else is here? Wave Motion Cannon, and Nightmare Wheel as well, as long as with like Ring of Destruction. So that's a lot of burn as long around. That's a lot of burn cards. So if you're paying 4,000 life points with something like Solemn Judgment, or even if it's less than that, even if it's like 3,000 or 2,000, that's still a lot of life point cost. So you got to be careful with something like Solemn Judgment. I'm not going to say it's a bad card, but it's something to really think about when you're building your deck. And then there's also other cards. So uh, when I made my video for my deck, I said that instead of it's an OTK style deck with the Mega Rock Dragon and then the Dimension Fusion and Return from a different dimension to try to set up OTKs for myself. And you would think mostly with OTK decks that you'd be playing Giant Trunade, but in my deck I just played Zings instead of Giant Trunade, and I think I had Giant Trunade side decked and never even used it. But the reason why I'm bringing that up is that when you think of regular OTK decks in normal Go format, you're thinking of stuff like Rescue Cat, Reasoning Gate Turbo, like Benkai and Nataza the Zapper, things like that, where they're running basically they're always running 3 Giant Trunades. But setting up OTKs in this format, it takes a lot longer, and it's something that's more of a process. It's more like you really got to set up your OTK before you can pull it off. And so you'd still be thinking, well, yeah, the Giant Trunade's still good. But if you open up a Giant Trunade, it's just like a dead card. Like you either don't use it at all and try to save it for when you try to push for OTK, which means that you're just like one card less in your hand until you finally do get to that point where you can OTK, or you use it just one turn and take the back row off the field just to get in for attacks or to destroy a monster that you need to destroy. And then next turn, your opponent gets to set all that back row again. Whereas Zing is just always live. So you can set this turn 1, and then whenever you get the opportunity to, you can Zing and lock down 2 of your opponent's back rows. So if you draw this turn 1 or even later in the duel, it's probably not going to be as good because there's going to be less likely that there'll be multiple back row to lock down, but there's still the potential to. But when you have Giant Trunade be dead turn 1, Zing is live turn 1, and when your opponent sees that you're playing Zing, it's going to affect the way that they play the duel, because they can't really afford to have 2 of their back row taken away from them, because now they have to spend their 1 Dust Tornado or 1 MST on that Zing. And if you lock down one of those Dust Tornado or MSTs, then they might go for the rest of the duel without being able to free up that back row unless they play something like Heavy Storm or have something else that's a back row removal that's in their main deck. So that Zing's going to really heavily affect the way your opponent plays, and it could force them to just set 1 card instead of 2 because they're so fearful of the Zing that one back row isn't going to be enough to save them from like an OTK push, or isn't going to be able to enough to save them from losing board advantage and never recovering. So the Zing just much more impactful, I think, in this kind of format than something like a Giant Trunade. And then there's other cards I want to just kind of go over. So I talked about how limiting spell back row removal is. Dispel can be really good for those floodgates, things like Levitt Limited Area B, Messenger of Peace, those continuous spell cards. If people are playing field spells to boost up like their wind monsters or water monsters, you can play this on that. And it's also good for just the meta cards, the standard meta continuous spell cards like Premature Burial or Snatch Steel. And then if people are maybe doing stuff with like equip cards like United We Stand or Mage Power, so this is, at least I would say, this is a good side deck card. I wouldn't maybe main deck it, but I would definitely have this in the side deck. Baital is also another interesting card for back row removal. When you're looking at these decks, a lot of these decks, they do not have chainable back rows. They're not multiple Dust Tornadoes, multiple Raigeki Breaks, multiple Phoenix Wing Blasts. There's a lot more things that are just actual standard trap cards like Mirror Force, Torrential Tribute, Sakuretsu Armor, Widespread Ruin, Magic Cylinder. You can see these throughout all these topping decks that a lot of the back row wasn't chainable. So something like Bait Bell could be effective. And then we're going to get onto the utility cards. So Book of Moon is kind of like the ultimate utility card in standard Go format, the competitive scene. But because a lot of the really good flip effect monsters are basically banned in this format, so Magician of Faith, you can't play that. Night Assailant, you can play it, but it's only with fiends, and it's kind of hard, and its effect isn't as good because you're not having as many good flip effect monsters to use the discard effect with. Plus, you probably don't have as many discard effect cards to be able to use that Night Assailant, and it's limited to one. So, I mean, Night Assailant's good, but it's kind of iffy. I mean, like Man Eater Bug, that's a good flip effect monster, I guess, but I didn't even, a lot of decks didn't even use that card. Um, GK Spy, you can only have one of them, so it's not something that you're probably going to be playing in your deck. Plus, it's actually banned unless you play specifically Gravekeepers. Um, just those like very good standard flip effect monsters that you're so used to seeing when you're playing Go format. A lot of them are just not playable in Go format or the Commander format. So Book of Moon loses a lot of value as a utility card. It's still good for dodging stuff like Snatch Steel, obviously. But if you're thinking about like Chaos Sorcerer as well, that a lot of the times when you're seeing a Chaos Sorcerer, you're thinking, oh, I can Book a Moon, whatever it targets to banish and then save that monster. Chaos Sorcerer isn't in this format either. So Book of Moon loses a lot of value as a utility card, where other cards, maybe like Interdimensional Janitor Transporter or My Body as a Shield, could be better utility cards, or Compulsory Evacuation Device. I'm not going to say that these cards are amazing. The 1,500 life point cost with My Body as a Shield is pretty steep, but if you can use that to block a Torrential Tribute or a Mirror Force, or anything that's going to be or Lightning Vortex, even something like that, it becomes a much greater value than something like the Book of Moon, obviously. But these are things to think about. I'm not saying that Book of Moon's bad. I think it's still a good card, but it's definitely loses a lot of utility value, not being able to pair it with a lot of flip effect monsters like you can in standard Go format. And then there's some good, just like one for one cards that people don't think of. Fissure, everybody knows about Smashing Ground because Earth Aggro runs that card, and Warriors will sometimes run it, I guess, in like side decks and stuff. But um, Fissure is also basically just the same thing as kind of Smashing Ground. It's kind of like how Widespread Ruin is the poor man's version of Sakuretsu Armor, then Fissure is the poor man's version of Smashing Ground, but can still be played. Bottomless Hat Trap Hole, that's something that does kind of get played in regular standard competitive Go format, but it's got a much better value in Commander here, where everything's limited to one. It could be a good uh, addition to any 40 card deck. If you're running Earth, Scapegoat's just always good to have it in either main or side deck. Dark Factory Mass Production, running normal monsters isn't great. It kind of doesn't feel great, but there are a lot of good normal monsters with stats, like high stats with 1900 or more attack or 2000 or more defense, that could be quite valuable in this format. And being able to recycle those is pretty valuable. Plus, with just how limiting the deck construction is, this could be a good addition or something to think about at least. And then I wanted to go over the deck commanders themselves, the choices. So one of the things that I saw with the best decks is that the best decks had commanders that were good typing and attribute, but also just good monsters on their own. So you're thinking about stuff like Scapegoat and Manticore Darkness and I guess even Mega Rock Dragon to an extent, it's a pretty good monster just on its own. So something like Slate Warrior again, wind isn't great as an attribute. It's not terrible. It's probably like second or third best. You can argue. I think it's probably second best to Earth, but the Fiend is a really good typing because there's a lot of good Fiend monsters that you can choose from. Pyramid Turtle is really good. Zombie gives you access to things like Ryukoki and Vampire Lord and um, what's the other one? Spirit Reaper that I was thinking of. And then it's also Earth Attribute. And like I said earlier, Earth Attribute alone is enough to build a good deck without even the typing. So you could, whatever Earth monster you pick, you're going to be able to make a good deck with, basically, just because your selection is so, you got so many monster cards to select from. Dark Dust Spirit, again, it's the same thing with the zombie typing and Earth, and then plus it's a spirit, so you get access to all the spirit monsters like Tsukiyomi and Azura Priest and Nab the White Rabbit if you want that, Susa Soldier. Plus, it's a tribute monster, so not just with Dark Spirit, but any tribute monster, it's nice to be able to combine stuff like Brain Control or Soul Exchange because those cards were going to always be live. So whenever you get Brain Control, anytime you can just Brain Control one of your opponent's monsters and then use your commander for a tribute summon. Same thing with Soul Exchange or even Stray Lambs. You can just tribute set it and then have an extra token that's available to be fodder. Sister Soldier is an interesting deck commander, again, for the same spirits reason like Dark Dust Spirit. The Thunder typing isn't that valuable, but it does give you access to Saborg, which is basically the only way to get Saborg, which is a good monster, obviously. But again, it's just like it's a good normal summon at 2000 attack, and then it's a floater that goes back to your hand. So it can't be Snatch Steal, which is nice, but it's just something that you can always have a beater monster in your hand and beat over things with it. And then the attribute and typing is good. And then Pinch Hopper and Howling Insect are really interesting, like recruiter monsters that could potentially be good deck commanders. So those are some of the things to just think about with your deck building. And then I'll kind of just go over some of the decks that I kind of made real quick. Nothing special. So here's one of the Slate Warrior. You can see just a bunch of pretty good feed monsters. And this one I did have some decent amount of normal monsters, and then Dark Master or Dark Factory mass production. This isn't one that I've tested out a lot, but it seems pretty solid overall. There's some other things like this is an interesting card to go with it. So the Puppet Magic of Dark Ruler. So what this is going to do is combine this with something like Mind Control or Enemy Controller or Brain Control, and then banish my opponent's monster to special summon one of my Fiend monsters from the graveyard. Probably like a 4-star more than likely. And then Bark of Dark Ruler. This works with Fiends as well. So you can reduce your own life points to reduce the attack of a monster during the damage step, which is pretty big. So it's kind of like another burn card where you can drop a opponent's monster from 1800 attack down to 0 during the damage step, and then do 1800 damage to your opponent, and potentially kind of be like a pseudo Ring of Destruction with a Fiend type monster. So that's interesting. So I was just talking about with being like creative with your commander, like you want a good monster, but like a also good typing as well. This format does really reward creativity as well, I will say. So feel free to get creative with what you're deck building. And then I'll go over the Mega Rock Dragon. This is the update. Oh, wait, no, wrong one. This is the updated Mega Rock Dragon deck. So the main deck's exactly the same, except I took out Beta the Magnetic Warrior for Fissure. That was the only change to the main deck. The side deck is drastically different. I've got more of a stall tactic in the side deck. I also added Megamorphosis for the Mega Rock Dragon, so I can turn that into the Last Warrior from Another Planet. And then there's more stall stuff with like the Sorcerer of Being Light and Ordeal from the Traveler, and Burn as well with a Wave Motion Cannon, and then Ejecting Fairy Lilies in the side deck in case I want to take out my OTK stuff with the Return from a Different Dimension and the Dimension Fusions, because then I'll have enough life points to actually pay for the Injection Fairy Lily and not be a dead card. So that's kind of the updated version of just what I learned from the tournament, and being able to kind of use hindsight and being able to use what the tournament showed me to make adjustments to the deck. I will say that whenever you're building a deck, doing practice duels will help a lot. It will show you like the strengths and weaknesses and things that you may need to change or with your deck. With these deck building, like it's just going to be a lot of I want to say like experimentation. So put something in and maybe it's good, maybe it's not, and it just doesn't work out the way that you want it, and you find out that you just need to take it out and try something different. Doing those practice duels will help a lot with your deck building and getting better at being more competitive, I would say. So that's all for this video. If you do have any questions or maybe need some advice with your deck building, feel free to shoot me a message on Discord. If you're someone that wants to take part in the event, but you're not really like the most creative deck builder or whatnot, I would say just look at a deck from the top four list, then you can kind of copy that and maybe put your own twist on it, or just pick something that's Earth and make a good Earth deck. Like you can't go wrong with that. Like anything with an Earth attribute is going to be a good deck, pretty much, is my opinion. And then just using meta cards. So that'll be all for that video, and I hope you enjoy playing in the GOAT format tournament for the Commander, and I hope to see you there.